to a moment of reflection, an opportunity potentially to think differently about our present time. First, a reflection backwards. I grew up during the portable power revolution, where we went from being accessible to accessible all the time. From a time when a considered opinion was offered in maybe a week to having an opinion and also having it considered within 24 hours. This was my hero, Nokia. I grew up in Sweden. When I grew up, Nokia was famous for Wellington boots. Everyone had them. And I grew up when they said, we're going to be something more. We can envision a future where everybody is connected. And they became the premier mobile, cellular epicenter for thinking about what all-time data would mean. In 2007, Forbes magazine said, who could possibly disrupt this amazing company that came from a commodity space into a high-tech space? Well, you know what happened. Sony took over with a better idea of what the consumer actually wanted. What did it mean to be on 24/7? And they laid the framework for interactive, handheld devices that offered screens that were easy to interact with. Apple, of course, defined how we ultimately interacted with that device. And Nokia lost the game. This is a humble reminder of how difficult it is to be a transformation and to participate in a transformation. And even if you got the onset of a transformation, what that means for generations to come and for times to come. We live at an interesting time. There's no question anymore that our temperature of the Earth is increasing. I'm a chemist by trade. I would say we live in a test tube right now. And the opportunity for all of you disruptors, all of us who enamored with data, try to make decisions and try to basically transact on the present with an eye to the future, have to look at this data and say, what does that mean? The data that I will show you and some of the graphs in this presentation are all in the public domain for a purpose. All of this data is abundantly available. This one is, of course, published in a very interactive and nice way because it's easy to see. We have lots of thermometers all over the world, and we can track what happens. So we're basically increasing the temperature, and you might ask, what does that mean? Well, to me, it is a little bit of an acknowledgement of what the climate scientists have said for a long time. I was a young professional in 2003 when the Stern report came in, and I had the privilege of being part of the UN delegation, which was 100 experts picked from all over the world on basically advising the COP15 meeting in Copenhagen. As we know, that meeting didn't go so well, but it was ultimately an amazing lessons learned for me to sit in that expert council, to hear how the rich world talked to the not-so-rich world, to hear the progressives talk to the conservatives. And I learned a very, very important life lesson. Progressives, not every idea is a good idea. Conservatives, not everything that when we remember it was accurately described to us in the present times. So what's the wisdom from that? Maybe it is to just extend the walls a little bit. If we acknowledge this crisis and this opportunity of change, can we do something really good with it? Can we do something that actually gets rewarded in our current paradigm, in today's economies, social construct, political and geopolitical environment? Acknowledgement of today with an eye to the future. This chart is interesting. This was published in Nature, which is kind of the top of the crop for scientists, by some of the most famous climate scientists that are alive today. And they pointed out several years ago that we're heading into basically an era that is very, very different than what we know today. What you see there is basically the geological phrases, the geological stages of the Earth. And you see kind of an intuitive map of where this ball, our Earth, can roll. We can go into a stabilized system, where we continue to use the glaciers as free air condition, or to a place where those are no longer available to us. The winds and the ecosystem that we have enjoyed for stability has changed dramatically, and we go to something that is really not known to us. This chart doesn't say when. It also doesn't say ultimately what, but it holds the walls for something to us to consider of a possibility. In fact, you know in your daily lives that there are impacts that we don't really understand. It is also true, of course, that the Earth has gone through many of these transformations in the past with a small change in that this is our time, and we're really not set up for some of the conditions that potentially are created. So what to do about that? Well, we can look at our behavior. So some simple data. We know that coal consumption is overall increasing. And we know that at the same time when we want to do something really, really good, I work with the World Economic Forum, I am co-chair for the Future of Energy, where we think about global perspectives about how to balance new technology with current economic paybacks, and yet the wonderful opportunity to lift people out of poverty and give them access to energy. The solution might not be what you've always known. It might be something different. Hold the walls, be open for the opportunity. This picture, if it continues, is not great. It goes into what the climate scientists refer to as the hothouse. So what else can we do? When we look at the greenhouse gases, so roughly 10 of them that matter, it's overwhelmingly CO2, 82% roughly. Methane is a problem. There's some reports out that say we're potentially in some regions of the world releasing 15% in this ecosystem. So methane is a different beast than CO2 in the general environment. And I invite you to think about our Earth as this wonderful core with a silk scarf wrapped around it. A thin, delicate silk scarf, which is protecting us and keeping us safe. And these are kind of the villains going into that silk scarf fabric, eating it, etching it. So, again, data, not a catastrophe today, what to do. More data, all in the public domain. Where is the action? Well, we're meeting here in beautiful Calgary in Canada, in North America, where it's still very, very lovely. Most of us could afford coming here, so my bet is most of us are also in the more privileged classes. Most of us have also enjoyed getting that wealth through our lifetime. Most of us are educated and have access to not only this data, but all the data that we use in our daily lives. And we know that by 2040, 80% of all human beings, if we continue as we do today, on the progress that we're doing today, will live in China, in Africa, and in India, or Greater Asia. 80%. That's a huge transformation. And to us, it means a dear responsibility. We have the knowledge, we have the data, and we have the initiative. So where can you touch all this climate opportunity and economic opportunity? So many discussions happen where I think we have looked back in history and humankind has done amazing things many times over. It's never one hero, It's never one movement. It is when we come together with our minor contributions, our very limited understanding, but we collaborate and we talk together about different opportunities. So when you look at this chart, where do you have some knowledge? Where do you have some networks? How can you touch these sectors? Many of us love the cars, the opportunity for electric vehicle. If you have driven one, you'll probably never go back to a combustion engine car. It's faster, it's a different interaction, you become more in tune with your vehicle. It's just a different experience. But of course, that transition will not happen overnight. What can you do to engage in that environment? Agriculture, really complicated. With increasing temperatures, we will need to use more technology and more opportunities for innovators to come in. Can you touch that? Can you put in a sustainability hat and an economic development hat? You get the opportunity. Industry, transportation, electricity in general, all of these opportunities. I was struck, and I had a delightful dinner yesterday with one of your biggest change makers in Canada, who comes from the oil industry. The oil industry is not the villain. It is a really important partner. The oil and gas industry is making a lot of money. And in order for us to make a change, we need that industry to be part of and potentially shape this transformation. We need that industry to invite innovators, policymakers, economists, dreamers and doers to engage. This chart is just trying to inspire for something a little different than just burning fossil fuels. Fossil fuels or fossil raw materials are really important. In fact, I believe my dress is made out of fossil starting raw materials. Most of the materials you sit on, your cups, your shampoo bottle this morning, was probably made out of oil products. What if we think about that resource in a different way, and we, you, as consumers, have a chance to really influence how that raw material is used? What if we all commit to asking a little bit more questions and we become more of a voting cattle to what is right and what we want? We can. In fact, some of these pictures are pretty cool. When you look at the building materials, that's actually from the wood industry, where people 15 years ago were looking at either completely resin, so polymeric oil-based products, or wood. Today, we have composites. Why is this so cool? Because it uses the resource a little bit differently without putting carbon into the air. There's no war on carbon. It is an opportunity to use this precious resource in a better way. It is an opportunity because we have time, actually. We're not desperate. We're not in doomsday. We have time. But it might be shorter than some people think. You're here because you like to understand how and how you can contribute and where you contribute. So you are part of the hero fabric of that future. A little bit about electricity, because it is one of the most fundamental pillars of economic growth. The present paradigm, by and large, invites basically centralized power plants that go through transmission networks and that go through distribution and then hits all the stakeholders, the homes, the big buildings, the industrial components, and the electricity needed. In most developed countries, the rich countries, these are also separated. So we have some ideas about not concentrating power in any one of those. So you have basically 4 stakeholders by and large. When we look at the future, which already has started, so I feel tickled by this, we have a different fabric. we're going into an opportunity to revolutionize how we think about energy. We own the energy paradigm together. We transform this together. And what does that mean? Well, with the onset that Nokia started with smartphones and access to data 24/7, you actually can control how much you use, where you use it, how that impacts things because of the public domain and the transparency. And you could actually become a trader of energy. How's that, you ask? Well, electrons are agnostic. You can generate them from lots of different sources, and you can deploy them, you can store them in between purchasing them, and then you can use them when you think you should use them. You can make trade opportunities for yourself. For example, you could decide to set your house on a hot day to a slightly higher temperature, take off the socks and walk barefoot, or on a winter day, put on a sweater and not heat your house. You could decide to run all of your laundry and all of your heavy electricity stuff when the electricity transmission is not overburdened. Why does this matter? Because we are all so connected, and this graph illustrates basically almost like a Bitcoin of energy. We're almost there. We have the technology, and we become nodes of user points and decision-making. How cool is that? Lots of opportunities for multiple technologies. And if you only take one thing away from this talk, it's going to be hold the walls and look for solutions. There's not one fix. There's not one person. There are lots of solutions that need to be considered because the regions where we deploy are quite different. China has a remarkable opportunity. I have had the opportunity to work in China for many, many years, and I'm in my second innovation company inside China. Why inside China? Because China really, really matters. If we honor the fact that China is lifting more people out of poverty at a rate than anybody else, and that they are so hungry for energy because it's really the fuel of economic growth, if you care, you have to be there. So I have had the privilege of being part of the electric vehicle transformation. In fact, Shenzhen, one of the hyper-growth cities, started as a fishing village in the 80s, is now 100% electric drive in buses and taxis. How can that be? In fact, we don't have to go as far as to China. We can look right here. Here's an overview of all the countries and the penetration of electric vehicles. This is really interesting. The leader is Norway. Norway, this tiny country, way up in the north. They're not super affected by hot weather, but boy, do they feel climate change. And they were able to mobilize their people. But Norway is not alone. So when you read the list of these countries, what you see is there's a lot of wealth in the countries that were able to pioneer these markets. That's not particularly different than what we experienced when we loaded up the portable power era. For every cool new cell phone or laptop, we always introduced the products at high end. Why? Because the people who would be able to afford that would also enjoy that application, take the time to study it, and then be an evangelist. These are our evangelists. These countries are proving different models, whether they work or not. They're holding the walls. They're giving it a shot to try. So let's look at one of them. Let's look at Norway. What did they actually do? How could they get almost 50% of all new sales into this full electric drive? So these are good examples. Not to say that Norway was perfect, but to maybe use that in this collaborative fabric that we have to create over the next few years. What could work in your region? One of these? Do you have something else? Some of these are quite innovative. Some of these actually cost no money to society. How interesting to offer free parking for a sustainable vehicle is maybe less revenue, but how much? A consideration. In fact, when I go back and look at the plug-in, so plug-in automotive means both fully electric and cars with dual drivetrains, so both a fossil fuel drivetrain and an electric drivetrain. Plug-in meaning you have to plug it in, right? So the penetration there is pretty dominant in China, the United States. So now it's, of course, the bigger countries have higher impact. So we have to engage in these big countries. When the smaller countries are champions, the smaller economies are champions, they are teachers, they are advisors to what could work. Impact will come in the masses. When we look at some of the data, this is again in the public domain from one of the finest analytics groups we have today, there is a lot of disagreement on what the actual data is. And in fact, we see a lot of forecasting that turns out to be too conservative. But it doesn't matter who you look at. Most of these say, we are already in a change transformation phase. We are already talking about what the new future could be. We're already exploring, and now we just have to make sure we understand how to do it. That's all transport. Let's hop over to Australia. This is one of the most interesting countries to me. 25 million people, really, really wealthy, with a growth that has basically gone beyond what the previous generation envisioned for centralized power. So the power grid is not delivering what the citizens want. Very interesting. So there was courage in those politicians to say, let's do a really big battery, wind, solar experiment. And really big was still a fraction of this transition of what electricity meant. Those are heroes. Was it perfect? No. Was it better than they thought? Yes. In fact, this battery storage facility was already paid off in the first year to 25%. And after 4 years, those batteries are still in commission and delivering. The United States is interesting. So for those of you who follow politics, you might have noticed the disconnect sometimes between the federal government and the local governments. So I'm going to highlight a few of those, but I'm going to start on a federal side. In the United States, this is basically US average. There's a very interesting trend. So first of all, the utility companies are getting involved. Why? Because there has been a little bit of a silent solar revolution in the United States. Why? Because there has been big storms where people, again, who had access to money or who lived in states where the green banks were very active. So you could say the rich and the poor have taken advantage of solarized programs. And now they would like to get into storage. The personal engagement is pretty high. The industrial engagement is very interested and curious at this point. And I think we'll see a huge transformation. California, of course, leads in the United States and potentially to the world in some of the best policy thinkers. They set aggressive targets and they drive global markets because it's a very lucrative market. It's one of those premium markets where people are willing to pay for new solutions early. The California legislators put together rules and instructions how to get there, basically guidelines. And here is one example. They will bring down the CO2 level by 2050, pre-industrialized times. New York, the other powerhouse of the United States, where you have New York City as potentially 20 million people in a mega metropole, where you have the old paradigm of transmission not being able to deliver. The difference between peak and off-peak in New York State, 30 cents a kilowatt hour to 1.2 cents a kilowatt hour. Now that's an economic opportunity. And in addition, when you look at this chart, you'll see that we're lucky in the United States. Most of the old infrastructure is aging out. There is a huge need to transform and upgrade that equipment. So there is an opportunity for the politicians to say, I'm going to stick to my old paradigm, or I'm going to hold the walls and be courageous. And New York State has decided that they are putting in new types of energy, going back to the fabric, if you remember that picture, of traditional transmission and utility companies partnering up with this new paradigm of solar, battery, wind as a generation and storage. Batteries, of course, are super interesting in this. Why? Because they're agnostic. They don't care if the electrons came from fossil fuels or solar, for example. That's very interesting, but only if they deliver in a success rate. So coming back to the portable power and that era, most of the battery companies that you know of today came from that. They're Japanese, Korean, and Chinese, most of all. The paradigm came from cell phone technology and laptop technologies. The whole evolution of that was to power small handheld devices. And then either gang up a lot of them or just scale a small battery into a big battery. The evolution is so quick that those battery companies are trying the best they can to deliver into the market need, but the technology was never really designed for that. And you have these types of events. So this is a chart from South Korea. We had 4% failure rate. Not so great. So I asked myself and my colleagues, and I'm asking you, what is the framework to think about these new technologies as we ease them into the market? And in 2012, where I had already exited the portable power era, where I had the privilege of grow up and contribute some, I'm terrified of this future. I'm a chemist by trade. I feel we live in the test tube where we're also making experiments. And for me, it doesn't matter if there is something bad happening in 20 years or 50 years. I just don't like the trajectory, and I'm going to do everything I can to keep us in the climate where we can basically continue to thrive. So I set up this framework. What if we think about this as only 3 things that matter? 1, cost. Cost has to be in the environment where we operate today. So some of you are lucky. You live in a government with policies that are basically targeted to try to equalize the electricity or the energy costs. Some of you don't. So whatever the cost of electricity is in your jurisdiction, that's the cost. Can you get a government to subsidize? Maybe. Should you try to influence it? Maybe. But cost matters. The true cost that is passed on to the user really, really matters. So now I'm going to bring in a concept that I have dedicated my last 7 years to, and that is just on the brink of coming into commercial markets. Here's a new type to look at the old paradigm and the new paradigm. So what you see here is basically using the guts of the portable power industry, the electrochemical cores, they're green in this picture, that are put into, think of a Coke can, an aluminum, really thin can that is an extraordinary heat conductor. That is welded to a bottom plate, so lots of metal. So inherent in this battery design, you have a heat sink. And instead of having each one of these having all these components, there's a big cell. And in fact, one of the biggest battery companies in the world named this the supercell, an opportunity to think of a cell as a building block. I gave a TED talk almost 7 years ago, where I said, it's my dream to create a Lego block of energy with all the best practices from the industry of portable power into future markets. I don't think this is the perfect Lego block, but it's one. And I'm sharing it with you so you also can get inspired to think about what is presently available that you can use in your environment, in your ecosystem, and bring it into today. What can you do to lower cost? In this case, I can simplify it and just say, I use the same components and the same CapEx. I just put it together a little bit differently in a different architecture. And in fact, when I do that, I also affect the energy density and the efficiency. How's that? Well, when the traditional world only can use this diameter, I can use a much bigger diameter. Why? Because safety is already engineered inside the box. So I get higher energy density for free. Safety, of course, is ultimately the responsibility of the government. If we succeed in getting into buildings in the infrastructure, storage is critical. Again, being agnostic to where the electrons came from, they have to be stored. I buy them at cheap, and I use them when the traditional way is really expensive. Wonderful. This is a benefit to utility companies, to industrial users of big real estate complexes like this one, or your house. How can that be part of my frame-up for a technology? Well, what if I just engineered safety into the Lego block and took it through? Just an example. If you think about these three things, cost, performance, which includes efficiency, and safety, when you touch your parts of this complex fabric, I think we have a chance. In fact, I know there is a very exciting future when people who are able to hold the walls get picked up and noticed by some of the biggest players today. So in collaboration with one of the biggest power providers, in this case this is ABB, we got recognized by the United States Department of Energy and Department of Defense, because we had delivered on those three paradigms. And now New York State is launching a very large demonstration project for applications going into New York City. I'm sharing this because we're still operating inside the paradigm of today. Yes, it will be cheaper than the solutions that already exist. And it will fit into densely populated urban areas. And the most interesting thing is, this is championed by NYPA, the New York Power Authority, which is the United States' biggest public utility. In fact, there's a lot of collaboration between the US and Canada on the hydropower from Niagara Falls. This project is part of that demonstration and the thought process on how do you think about that. Again, it doesn't matter where the electrons came from, but what matters is you can basically store. So whether they came from hydro, it's really hard to turn up the turbines of Niagara Falls up and down, and it's very expensive. Same, it's very expensive to load and unload a peaker plant. So if I can keep everything at even keel, and yes, maybe we can transfer some of our use models to do all of our electricity-heavy stuff at night. Maybe we can do that, but why not make it easy for ourselves? Put a battery bank under your bed, in your garage, on the top shelf of your library. And you can do the arbitrage yourself. Has to be safe, has to be cost-effective, and it has to be efficient. What an interesting world. This day and age, we have so many privileges. We have such tools at our fingertips. Again, all these charts, we will make them available to you afterwards, so you can use them whatever you like during your presentations and your ability to touch people. Look at this. This is the rate of innovation. And what you see, of course, is it's going faster and faster and faster and faster. So mindfulness in innovation means not every new idea is a good idea. Not everything we did in the past was great. But to actually evaluate and look at the merits, There's not one solution. There's not one person. It's going to be a lot of us contributing. And I think it's really important to recognize one of the biggest failures of our times. As we try very, very hard to envision what the future is and what the markets will be and what the opportunities are, we almost always fail. I think this is funny, and I think this is part of why the utility industry is so engaged in helping shape the future of electricity and the future of energy, because that industry completely missed the boat and underestimated what the solar industry would do. The solar industry came to the utility companies and said, we have a new solution, we have a new way to deal with this. And the utility companies said, it's very interesting, we just don't know. Courage. Now there is this learning, and it's recent, so the benefit of big transformation happen very quickly is, of course, you can become more courageous. When you see a mega trend, maybe you can step onto that and try it out. And here is the opportunity. All the colors except red are forecasts, and you see the different years. Red is what actually happened. So, we are at a really interesting time. We're alive today, and we are super privileged. We have an opportunity to use that privilege, our insights, access to data at our fingertips to do something great. We should not be completely stifled by the fact that if we don't get it right, there are catastrophic outcomes. We should be encouraged and feel wonderful about the opportunity that we can do amazing things. And I think the key word is doing. We can make money in this paradigm, and money is really, really important. Economies are really important. We build welfare on economies, and we have an opportunity to build more equitable solutions for the future by inviting unlikely parties to transact together. You have the responsibility. I have the responsibility to step up our game, to know the data, know the facts, because facts matter. It doesn't matter if I say something. Mother Nature is very kind to us. It is what it is. If you can test and verify and deploy, you'll have enormous impact. So, the opportunity is here for us to continue to network, to continue to take the mission forward, touch where you can touch, and really engage. These are your friends. Connect with your other friends, but do commit to helping the future generations for a long time. There's an opportunity for unlikely players, small companies partnering up with big companies. And the big company doesn't have to own the small company. We could shape this future together. There's an opportunity for the little person to just do a little better and ask more questions, be mindful of your spending. And there's an opportunity for leaders, where you have been given the opportunity to lead, to provide an insight or advice to really do that in a considered way. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.